Hey there, for this week's Rockstar Minute, we had our green screen set up, so we're gonna do some fun stuff in the background. I have no idea what's behind me right now. Who knows what our designers are gonna end up doing. So enjoy the show behind me. What I wanted to talk about was the rent controls. So last week, Tom touched more on the foreign tax that was implemented by the Ontario government, and I'll touch on rent controls for a second. They basically, what they did is the Ontario government they expanded the rent controls that were in place for properties built before 1991 to all properties, even the ones built after 1991, and they're going to tie it to inflation. So the government's inflation calculation is slightly crazy, so it's going to be like capped at 2.5%. It's often quite low. And if you look at property taxes and hydro, yes, Ontario government, hydro prices are still going up even with your tiny little rebate. So if you look at all those costs, our costs as landlords are usually higher than their magical inflation number. However, here's where this becomes very, very important. Like we've been sharing for a long time, investing in real estate for the long term, cash flow becomes very important. So if you've been in a negative cash flow situation like a lot of Toronto condo investors, now they're capped. They can't increase the rent a lot unless someone moves out of the property, so they may be stuck in that situation for a while. But if you've been investing for positive cash flow already, well then you're in not such a bad situation because you've already got that stability built into that stream of income for your properties, right? Now here's the good side to it and the bad side. The bad side is for renters. Although it sounds good for renters, in the long term, we don't think it's going to be that great. And here's why. In Ontario, in Southern Ontario specifically, we had just gotten to a point where it was appealing enough for people to start developing purpose-built rental properties again. And it looks like a lot of those plans are going to fall by the wayside because it's not attractive, the numbers are not attractive enough. The Ontario government thinks they're going to combat this by adjusting property tax slightly on multi-unit apartments, things like that, and we don't think it's going to have much of an impact. So the rental stock is not going to expand the same way that the market was trying to get it to expand. The free market forces had already started to get it to expand, and we think it's going to kind of either stagnate or shrink, or depending on what happens, right? So that's not so good. The good news for investors are if you have rental properties already, that means it's likely going to be in the long term more demand for your properties because there's not all this purpose-built rental stuff coming on the market, right? Especially for condo investors, there's no apartments being built, so your condos are really the new apartment of Toronto, right? So that's the way that we see this stuff playing out. It doesn't really impact us, ourselves, or the majority of investors that we've seen investing because most of them weren't out there implementing 50% rent increases. In fact, I don't know anyone that was implementing 50% rent increases. The media will find one or two people that have done that, and they'll splash it across the headlines to make it flashy, but really the large majority of people weren't doing that, so it's not going to have that much of an impact in one way or the other, but it is good for the election for the Ontario government, and they're going to use that to their advantage when they position how they were a champion for renters and how much they've helped them by implementing this. But long-term, rent controls aren't really going to have a huge impact. Here's one more point to it. And I know we're over a minute for the Rockstar Minute. The last point to it is that in many, many other areas that have rent controls, the good news for investors is that artificially keeps rents a little bit low, okay? Not necessarily good news, but with it keeping it low, it means they're more stable. So the likelihood of rents ever fluctuating or taking a big drop are very, very low. In Western Canada, where there were no rent controls, when the economy seizes up a little bit, rents drop drastically and people are scrambling to try to get tenants. In rent control markets, in many different areas in the world, that doesn't happen. So it creates a lot of stability. So now with that stability in place, when you're calculating your numbers moving forward, it gives you some confidence with your investment decisions. So overall, the rent controls aren't necessarily a negative for investors. In fact, there's probably more positive that outweighs the negative. And it's just a lot of people freeze in fear with changes. They don't know what's going to happen. But I think long term, investors are going to see that this might be a good thing. I know we're not too scared of it, and we're still looking to do our stuff, and hopefully you are too. So until next time, your life, your terms.